Last week you learned how to ask basic questions in French, but there are a few different ways of putting together questions. So we're going to learn two of them this year in French one, just because they're both fairly common. There's another way of asking questions that you might see, but we're not going to learn about it this year because it's just a little bit more complicated. So moving from what we saw last week into a new approach. Quelle est la différence? What is the difference? So I have two questions here. Tu joues au basket où? Où est-ce que tu joues au basket? Tu fais du vélo quand? Quand est-ce que tu fais du vélo? Tu joues au tennis avec qui? Avec qui est-ce que tu joues au tennis? Tu fais du surf en quelle saison? En quelle saison est-ce que tu fais du surf? So, do you think these two questions mean the same thing or do they mean something different? Each of these pairs of questions means the exact same thing. If you look at the words that make it up, this first question is asking, you play basketball where? The second question is where? Then we have this new phrase, est-ce que, and then we have you play basketball. They're actually asking the exact same thing. It's just two different ways of putting together questions. Okay, so this is what you had learned how to do already. We learned that you can put together a question by putting subject, verb, whatever other information we need, and then our question word at the end. But there's another way of asking questions that uses est-ce que. So we're going to learn about how est-ce que works today. Now, these were all information questions, but we're actually just going to start off with the basics. We're going to start off with yes or no questions today. So what I want you to know is that questions using est-ce que are considered slightly more formal than questions that do not use est-ce que. And you'll find this little line of notes on the very top of the back of your notes paper. So questions that use est-ce que are considered slightly more formal than questions that don't use est-ce que. So the informal structure that we learned how to do last week would be tu joues du piano? Do you play piano? A slightly more formal version would be est-ce que tu joues du piano? Which also means do you play piano? Now, a couple notes about that phrase est-ce que. First of all, pronunciation. It is way more letters than what you actually need to pronounce. This whole part right there, the est-ce, all of that makes the sound S, okay? Just like you're saying the letter S. And then this word, which we've seen before, that's come up in other things, that word is pronounced que. So that expression is pronounced est-ce que. Répétez, est-ce que. Now, est-ce que, if you want to know what the actual words mean that make it up, essentially it means is it that, okay? So this is the is, this is the it, this is the that. Is it that you play piano? Which of course sounds super awkward to us, but it makes perfect sense in French. So, tu joues du piano? Do you play piano? Est-ce que tu joues du piano? Is it that you play piano? Or simply, do you play piano? So two different ways of asking the exact same thing. So in your notes, the only other thing we're filling out today is just this one other little section, the top of the section, les questions formelles, formal questions. So to make a yes or no question more formal, we just add est-ce que to the beginning. So est-ce que goes at the very beginning of that question. So remember with all of the questions that we did last week, we had kind of a formula for them. Our formula now is going to be est-ce que plus our subject, plus our verb, plus any other information that we need. And that's the formal version of a yes-no question. So for examples, again, I'm taking the same questions that I had used before. You can write down any one that you want, or if you want to write down two or even all three of them, you can. So, Est-ce que tu fais du vélo? Is it that you go biking or do you go biking? Est-ce qu'il joue au volley? Is it that he plays volleyball or does he play volleyball? Est-ce que vous parlez français? Is it that you speak French or do you speak French? So those are our examples. They're the exact same questions that we had seen last week. Literally the only difference is we added the phrase est-ce que at the beginning. The benefit of that is that if you remember from our questions last week, we talked about intonation and we talked about how when we don't have this at the beginning, if we just have the phrase tu fais du vélo, our voice has to go up at the end, and that's what tells the listener, hey, this is a question. If you use est-ce que at the beginning, then the listener doesn't have to wait until the end to know whether it's a sentence or a question. They know right from the beginning, oh, this is going to be a question because I hear est-ce que at the beginning. Est-ce que is only used in questions, okay? So that's maybe a reason why you might use this, is to kind of help the other person out, let them know right off the bat, hey, I'm going to be asking you a question. Now, last week we talked about how to kind of build more complex ideas. These are the same questions that we had before, but this time we're going to practice with them in the est-ce que format. So it's going to be just a little bit longer because we have that extra phrase, but otherwise the structure is exactly the same. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause your video here, figure out how to put these questions together, and then unpause, and then we'll go through them together. Numéro 1, do you want to play soccer with me in the park tomorrow? Now remember, we're going to build this gradually. So, do you want? We're going to start with est-ce que today. So, est-ce que tu veux to play soccer, jouer au football, with me, avec moi, in the park, au parc, tomorrow, demain. So it looks like this. Est-ce que tu veux jouer au football avec moi au parc demain? We just add each of those pieces on in that sequence. Numéro 2, are we going to go shopping at the mall this weekend? Est-ce que nous allons faire les magasins au centre commercial ce week-end? Numéro 3, do they like to go skiing with friends in winter? Est-ce qu'ils aiment faire du ski avec des amis en hiver? Notice what happens here. When est-ce que is followed by a vowel, so for example, il or elle, trying to say est-ce que il would be super awkward. So we actually are going to connect those two pieces together. Est-ce qu'il, we drop the e at the end and replace it with an apostrophe. Numéro 4, does Madame speak French when there is no school? Est-ce que Madame parle français quand il n'y a pas d'école? Et numéro 5, y'all don't do math homework in the library? Est-ce que vous ne faites pas les devoirs de maths à la bibliothèque? Same idea, even though this is a negative question, we're still putting est-ce que at the beginning. So that's simply another way of asking yes or no questions. It's really not any different than what we learned last week, other than we're just sticking the phrase est-ce que at the beginning of the question.